Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and today it's Week 7, it's rankings, it's the running backs. We're going to take a look at some of the discrepancies between my good friend Pat Fitzmaurice and our guest today from CBS Fantasy, Roto_Frank himself, my boy Frank Stampfl. And Frank, at the top of every show, I like to press the guest. I just saw a fun stat that Josh Allen has more total yards himself than the entire Chicago Bears offense. So I'm going to ask you this. Can the Chicago Bears offense get their you-know-what together at any point this season and make anything good for them in fantasy?
I do think so. I thought we saw some good signs on Thursday Night Football, despite that game just being atrocious, like most Thursday Night Football games. But I feel like Justin Fields is slowly coming around. He's targeting Darnell Mooney more. David Montgomery, he's going to be in that high-end flex, low-end RB2 discussion. So I think we're getting closer. It's like the first couple of weeks, it was archaic football. We're talking like 1950s, 1960s, just run the ball like 40 times and see whatever happens. But I think we're getting closer. Will they be better than Josh Allen? Probably not.
Yeah, Fitz, I think that if they continue in this direction, that all their games should be called in that old 1920s, 30s radio voice, like, oh, that's Justin Fields, takes the ball. Oh, let's see. Oh, that's another run play. Oh, boy, I hope this really works for them. I'd like to do an entire show in that voice if I could, but they say that I can't. So we'll just have to do rankings instead. And today, of course, you're going to be using our Fantasy Pros rankings. You can check out the ECR at fantasypros.com/rankings. That's the place to do it. So let's start with some guys that Pat Fitzmaurice likes more than our boy Frankie Stampfl. Let's start with Najee Harris. Pat, you've got Najee at RB17. Only a few spots here behind are you, Frank, at RB22. ECR is even higher at RB15. Pat, it feels like no matter what we do, we can't shake the first round value of Najee Harris. I know he got in the end zone last week, but what is his value, in your opinion, this coming week?
Yeah, I got to give Frank credit here for outflanking me on Najee, who I've been fading all year. And somehow Frank, is even much lower than I am on him. And, it's easy to see why. Like 3.2 yards per carry so far for Najee this year, 3.9 yards per target, which is terrible. So this ranking in no way reflects actual enthusiasm for Najee Harris, but we're still getting volume from him. Maybe not quite the glorious volume that we got from him in his rookie year, but 13.8 carries a game, double-digit targets in every game so far, on pace for 40-plus catches, which, a little behind last year's pace, but still making at least a dent as a pass catcher. The Miami run defense has mostly been pretty good, like kind of a tough matchup, except against Frank's Jets 2 weeks ago, where the Jets had 5 TD runs and pretty much ran all over them. And Najee has scored 3 touchdowns in 6 games, so there's touchdown upside. I mean, it's just opportunity here, and it's mostly been empty opportunity so far. He's definitely squarely in RB2 range rather than the RB1 range everyone was hoping for. Mm-hmm. Still a little bit of value, though. I mean, I think in a 14 bye week, you're probably forced to start him.
Yeah, that is true. And the buys makes things harder. He is RB23 on the year and a half PPR. And actually from this morning when we put the show together, I see he's actually clicked down all the way to RB20, which is getting closer to Frank's fade, actually. So he's gone from 15 this morning all the way to 20 in just a few hours. So the stock is dropping. Why is the stock dropping for you with Najee? I know that Pat said you probably got to start him anyway, but there's still reason to understand how you're starting him in what context and how you might have to help him out a little bit and the rest of your team in the flex spot if you do.
Yeah, it's been a rough season for Najee Harris and really this entire Steelers offense. I don't see how it's going to get better in the foreseeable future, whether it's Kenny Pickett or it's Mitch Trubisky at quarterback. Najee Harris, 59 total yards or less in 4 of 6 games. Pat highlighted the yards per carry, the yards per target. Those are basically awful so far this season for Najee Harris. The target share is down to 9% compared to where it was at last year. And I do think it's a pretty tough matchup. Miami 7th in run defense DVOA. They're allowing just 3.69 yards per carry to running backs. The Steelers offensive line has not played well. They're 26th in adjusted line yards, according to Football Outsiders. So I think you probably do have to play him with all the teams on a bye, and not just the teams. They're really, really good teams with really, really good running backs. So you probably still have to get him in there as a low-end RB2. But I think most weeks when those running backs are back in the mix, he's probably more of a high-end flex option, and it has to do more with just the lack of efficiency and the offense that he plays for.
All right, before we get to the next guy on the list, don't forget about My Playbook cheat sheets. That is the tool that can help you go ahead and make the right decisions on instant waiver wire and lineup advice. And guess what? It's absolutely free. I know you like free stuff. Every American loves free stuff, and all of our people around the world who watch and listen to the show, I know who you are. I see you every Sunday in the live streams. You like free stuff too. So go to fantasypros.com/myplaybook. Check out the cheat sheets feature. Again, it's totally free, and there's no need to annoyingly toggle back and forth between positions and update new tabs. All the rankings for all the positions are conveniently shown on one single page. So get customizable cheat sheets for every single week from My Playbook over at fantasypros.com/myplaybook, or just go ahead and download the app. It's glorious. It's over at Android and at the Google Store as well. Let's get to the next one here, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Pat, you've got him at RB22, which is exactly where ECR is on CEH now. Frank has him at RB26. Now, Clyde Edwards-Helaire certainly has been touchdown dependent. He has 5 touchdowns on the season, but the last 2 weeks, 0. And his fantasy stock has certainly fallen here. He's got San Francisco this week. So, Pat, talk about your thoughts on CEH and this matchup he's got this week.
Well, you mentioned the TD dependence, Joe, and it's always hard to rank the guys who are so TD dependent. And, this puts me in the awkward position of defending a guy I don't really believe in myself and don't.
It's 2 players in a row here. I've really put you on the spot.
I know. And I don't think I have CEH on any team anywhere, like not even best ball team. So probably, 50 plus teams, no CEH. So yeah, and this matchup against the 49ers is brutal. They've allowed the fewest points to opposing running backs of any team. And we've only seen CEH with 1 game of double-digit carries, but there is a little bit of a usage floor. He has got at least 7 carries in every game, and he's had at least 3 catches in 4 out of 6 games so far this year. So a little bit of a floor there. And this game has a high implied or a high Vegas total. It's 48.5 points. So I don't know, with 5 TDs in 6 games, maybe there's a decent chance he gets into the end zone. Hard guy to rank. He's kind of in that weird netherworld behind the sure thing running backs and then the guys whose maybe volume you're not too sure about. Again, I think the bye weeks probably force you to play him if you've got him on your team, but yeah, it's a hard guy to feel real comfortable with in your lineup. No question.
All right, Frank, let's head into the netherworld here and your thoughts on CEH, because you've got him even deeper at 26 this week. So that's a flex play RB still, but if you have options of some other wide receivers with some better matchups, would you be starting them over CEH?
Yeah, I think I would look that way. I don't really know much what else I need to say because Pat has basically laid it all out for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's the only positive you could say is that he plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the best offenses in all of football. He only has 1 game with more than 12 touches on the season, back-to-back games of 35 scoreless total yards or less, playing just 44% of the snaps on the season. And there's inconsistency in terms of his usage on a game-to-game basis. We just don't really know. There's games where they're playing more up-tempo and they got Jerick McKinnon in there. They've, tried to work Isaiah Pacheco in as well. And it's kind of hard to know when it comes to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And it's a really, really tough matchup as you laid out, Pat. It's, the 49ers are first in run defense DVOA. They're allowing 3.1 yards per carry to running backs. Everything is arrow pointing down for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, at least in this matchup. I would rather use the Jaguars running backs, both of them over him. I'd rather use Brian Robinson. We'll get to a few of those names a little bit later on. But those running backs and even some low-end wide receiver 2 wide receivers or high-end wide receiver 3s, I would use those over Clyde Edwards-Helaire as well.
Some guys, no matter what you do, they just keep bouncing back. Latavius Murray is one of those guys. He just always relevant somehow every year in some way in fantasy. We find a way to make Latavius Murray happen. Well, the Denver Broncos are figuring that out. He is RB28 in Pat's ranks. Over on Frank's, he is 32. ECR has him at 33 right now. So obviously, they're not too keen in Denver on Melvin Gordon, Pat. Obviously, Mike Boone, they're really not too keen on him either. It seems like Latavius Murray is the dude that they want to run the ball with. So are you running with him in your lineups this week?
It's funny. We spent all offseason speculating about how the Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon split was going to work out. And here we are heading into week 7 with Latavius Murray as the Broncos lead running back.
In all fairness, Pat, we were right because Javonte Williams was the guy and he was going to be the guy. Melvin Gordon wasn't the thing. So.
Yes.
It's just sad.
The other weird thing is he had that Melvin Gordon had that sloppy fumble against the Raiders that pretty much cost them the game, the fumble 6, and like wasn't punished after that, and then for no real discernible reason gets benched in the Chargers game. Like that was just odd. So I have since dropped him 2 spots. I had him initially ahead of AJ Dillon and Kenyon Drake. I've moved those 2 guys ahead of Murray, and like we still don't know exactly what the workload split is going to be like, but we would have to imagine he's going to be at least the head of this committee, right? I mean, Hackett has talked about using all 3 guys this week. We'll see if that happens or not. But and now Russell Wilson, he had a shoulder issue. Now he's got a hamstring issue too. Maybe they have to be a little run heavier, but then, it's not a good thing overall because it probably reduces touchdown expectations for this offense. Yeah, it's the Jets run defense has been good, but not great. It's like, man, he's going to be a tough one for a lot of people. I think a lot of people are going to be deciding whether to play him or not. Like I know for me, I picked him up in a couple of leagues, and I'm actually excited about being able to start a guy who's going to get some carries this week, presumably. But I mean, that's all we know we're getting from Latavius, probably 10 touches minimum, and who knows what beyond that. So, yeah, another one where maybe I'm higher than consensus, but pretty hard to defend.
Okay, well, you're saying you're excited, but your face doesn't say it. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, he's saying the words excited.
Well, more
Frank,
excited than starting Chase Edmonds, put it that way.
Well, I mean, let's keep it real, obviously. But Frank, Latavius Murray is definitely a guy that a lot of people, especially with a heavy bye week here, again, picked up and are looking at whether or not they can start him. What are your expectations for him in this Broncos offense this coming week in week 7?
I know this isn't the answer that anybody wants to hear, but I have no clue, Joe. I mean, full transparency, I don't think that anybody knows when it comes to the Broncos backfield. I mean, Latavius Murray could have 15 touches this week. He could have 5 touches. It wouldn't surprise me if Melvin Gordon comes out and he's the lead back once again. Murray on Monday Night Football, he handled 16 of 21 running back touches. He led the position with 47% snaps. Again, would not surprise me one bit if Melvin Gordon actually winds up with those. But for this week, at least, I am ranking Latavius Murray as the highest Broncos running back, and that puts him squarely in the middle of the flex discussion. I agree. I would rather have like a Kenyon Drake, assuming that J.K. Dobbins is either out or limited for some reason. Jamal Williams, even if DeAndre Swift is back, I'd rather go down that hole. But yeah, once you get past those guys, it's like we're desperate. There's a lot of good teams, good running backs on a bye. I think you could probably trust, and I use that word loosely, Latavius Murray as like a flex type running back with about at least 10 touches, maybe more than that.
All right, let's move.
Frank mentioned, I was just going to say, Frank mentioned Jamal Williams, and I think I have him just ahead, 1 spot ahead of Jamal Williams. Like that's the value approximation here, I think.
Yeah. That's certainly a reasonable tone there. I mean, you could also argue that maybe Williams has a little bit more touchdown upside too, with the way this Denver Broncos offense has looked and incapable they've looked at times. Let's go with some guys that Frank likes more than Pat here. Let's start with Alvin Kamara. Kamara is at your RB4 spot, Frank. You've got him at 12, Pat. ECR is smack in the middle at 8. So let's talk about your expectations for Alvin this week here in week 7, Frank.
The role is just fantastic right now. 25 plus touches in 2 straight, 6 plus targets in 3 straight games for Alvin Kamara. He actually leads the Saints with 6 red zone targets. I think that's probably a product of their wide receivers being in and out of the lineup. No Michael Thomas for most of the year. Chris Olave missed last week as well. The Saints offensive line, they've kind of been up and down, but in terms of adjusted line yards, Football Outsiders, they rank very highly, 2nd in the NFL. I would expect him to see another 20 plus touches, maybe even approach 25 touches once again in this spot. And I have him just ahead of other names like Jonathan Taylor, who we're still kind of waiting to learn more about. He back at practice Wednesday. Looks like he's going to be able to go, but is he limited in any capacity? Derrick Henry, I still really like Derrick Henry, but I would expect Alvin Kamara to catch more passes and see more targets. So I just like him a little bit better than those guys. And as a result, it looks like I'm higher than consensus on Alvin Kamara.
Now, look, you're starting Alvin Kamara. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. But this is a matchup here against, you can even take this ranking and spin it into the DFS world too, because this is a matchup here against an Arizona defense. It's not very good, Pat. So is he closer to that real elite level here than he is necessarily on the fringe of RB1?
I think he is. But the one thing we have to look at is the quarterback situation for the Saints. Like, we have Jameis Winston now practicing with the team on a limited basis, but we don't know if they're automatically going to reinsert Jameis because apparently they like how the offense has been running with Andy Dalton at quarterback. And I mean, the numbers for Kamara with those two quarterbacks are pretty, the difference is stark. The first two games of the year with Jameis at quarterback, 24 carries, 100 yards rushing, 5 catches for 19 yards for Alvin Kamara, this elite pass catching back, just not being used at all with Jameis in there. So then Kamara misses week 3, and by the time he gets back, Andy Dalton is in at quarterback in 2 games with Dalton. 42 carries, 202 rushing yards, and 12 catches for 116 yards. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but that's pretty fluky. It's just a matter of time here. Frank mentioned the offensive line issues, and I do worry a little bit about Andrews Pete, the Saints' excellent left guard, likely being out for this one. It is one of those things where there are a lot of guys from about running back 7 to running back 12 or 13 who I have bunched very tightly together, just kind of splitting hairs. But I'll tell you, if Jameis Winston is playing quarterback, running back 12 might be too high, and I might actually move him down a little bit more.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to the next guy on the list, a guy who's trending in the right direction in fantasy terms, Travis Etienne. Ooh, one of my favorite guys last year and this year. You've got him at RB 26 here. I want to talk about this guy more because you guys actually both have them close. However, ECR, you're still a little behind at RB 23. I want to talk about the expectations of Travis Etienne. I mean, normally we're looking for the big, vast differences between people or even small differences. But I think it's important to talk about Travis Etienne because he is a player that's starting to tick up. You're seeing the volume tick up, but he is in a committee. And I think a lot of people are still concerned with what does that mean in terms of his fantasy value in starting him. So, Frank, I want to talk to you about Travis Etienne. Tell me what your thoughts are, your confidence level in him this week, and even going forward, too, as this backfield seems to be evolving in Jacksonville.
It's definitely growing. The confidence is growing in Travis Etienne. And I've actually since moved him up to RB23. So right in line there with ECR. And I think he's kind of worked himself into this low end RB2 range. I don't know that at any point, as long as James Robinson is healthy, that we'll see more than 15 touches in a game for Travis Etienne, but he is making the most of those touches right now and basically has been splitting work evenly with James Robinson each of the past 3 weeks. He's been much more efficient than James Robinson, 5.6 yards per carry to 4.2 for Robinson. And I don't want to knock Robinson too much because he's coming back from an Achilles injury, obviously, but he's still done a really, really good job. So it's just like, it's a testament. And I've been very impressed with what James Robinson has done this year. But even with that, Etienne has looked better than James Robinson this season. And it's an amazing matchup going up against the Giants. They're 28th in run defense, DVOA. They're allowing 5.48 yards per carry to running backs on the season. So I think as we move forward, I think that we'll probably see close to an even split, 12 to 15 touches for each of James Robinson and Etienne. But the way that Etienne has looked, he's more efficient, he's creating more yards, and I think the touchdowns will start to come. So as the season goes along, I think that he will consistently be ranked ahead of James Robinson.
Pat, your thoughts on Etienne?
Yeah, man, hard to believe he was a borderline cut for some people just a few weeks ago. We're feeling better now over the last 3 weeks, as our colleague Matthew Friedman has pointed out. Etienne has outsnapped Robinson 93 to 80. As far as carries plus targets, 36 to 33 in Etienne's favor, and 254 yards to 122 yards for Robinson. I think Etienne is much more immune to game script. Like, if they're playing from behind, he has utility there because of his work in the passing game. If they're playing from ahead, he's also a good runner. And whereas Robinson, I think, needs to be in those favorable game scripts, as he was for most of the first couple of weeks when the Jaguars were off to that surprise start. So this one, though, interesting because the Giants are giving up 5.5 yards per carry to opposing running backs, and they've allowed the 4th most rushing yards to running backs this season. So maybe this is more of a James Robinson game script. I sort of chickened out and have the two side by side in the rankings with Etienne 1 spot ahead. But I do think no matter which way the game goes, whether it's the Giants playing ahead, the Jaguars playing ahead, Etienne's going to have a role no matter what. And I don't know if we can say that about Robinson.
Fair enough. Now, you guys are pretty close in terms of your rankings, so there wasn't a lot of discrepancy. So I want to bring up another player that I feel like people are sort of on the fence with. They saw some more carries out of him the last week on Thursday Night Football. We have a change of quarterback for Washington now. It's Taylor Heineke back under center with Carson Wentz out. Brian Robinson, Frank, you've got a 25. Pat has a 27. ECR's got a 25. So Brian Robinson, again, I don't know how much he's going to work in the passing game necessarily, but in terms of what you're going to get, it feels like probably around at 15 for 75 and a touchdown. That's a very achievable line, and that should get him into most lineups, I think, for the rest of the season. Do you agree with that? And how do you feel about his matchup in week 7 against the Packers?
Yeah, I think if we consider a top 24 running back a must start, I think he's going to be on the fringe of that most weeks, and especially this one with the 4 teams on a bye, the 4 really good running backs on a bye as well. But he basically led the team last week, 17 of 27 RB touches, led the team with 47% snaps, and he also had 4 red zone opportunities. Great matchup against the Packers. This one's kind of tough because they're underdogs in the game. They're like 5-point dogs, but it's a really good matchup for running back. So it's, how does that work out? I mean, if they're playing from behind, they might have to throw the ball a little bit more, but maybe they just try to establish it early on in the game. Packers are dead last in run defense DVOA. They're allowing 5.3 yards per carry to opposing running backs. They've given up a touchdown to a running back each of the past 3 weeks. Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Damian Harris. So everything is there for Brian Robinson to, frankly, have a pretty good game. It's just, does this game get out of control in terms of game script? So I do have him, I think maybe a little bit lower than I'd want to have him. High-end flex, low-end RB2. I would take both of the Jaguars running backs ahead of him, but then he's right in that mix. I would take him ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So like all those names are basically all bunched up in a row. But Brian Robinson over CEH for me.
Pat, how much does the game script concern you in this instant for Robinson in this week 7 matchup?
A little bit, because we know he's not going to be a big factor in the passing game. 0 targets last week, despite the heavy ground usage. And, Frank mentioned how bad the Packers' run defense has been bad. And as a Packer fan, I can assure you it's looked as bad as the numbers suggest. But then again, they're going up against a Washington offensive line that's just terrible. I think they rank, 30th in 29th in Football Outsiders adjusted line yards run blocking metric, 27th in run blocking for PFF grade. They have center Chase Roulier on IR. I don't know whether they're going to have right tackle Sam Cosmi for this game. So their offensive line is kind of a mess. And I don't know. I didn't see a lot of juice out of Brian Robinson in that Bears game. And I mean, this is a guy who was shot twice in the legs a couple of years ago. So,
I can see the YouTube comments now. Pat Fitzmaurice, the guy got shot.
Yeah.
Come on,
man. Exactly. I mean, it's amazing that he's back.
It's amazing.
Scores that touchdown. Although the touchdown came after a turnover set up the Commanders inside the 10-yard line. Yeah, I'm not excited about the big play ability here, even though he's going against a bad run defense. I don't know what to make out of. I don't know whether it was Ron Rivera or Scott Turner saying asked about the non-usage of Antonio Gibson last game and being taken aback. Oh, is that it? We'll have to get him in more in the future. It was kind of like this naive.
Oops.
Yeah, exactly. So
that doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy. I don't think about your
like,
organization when they say things like that. It's definitely
strange. And clearly B-Rob is like the main guy here on the early downs. So I don't know, man. He's a high-end RB3 for me.
All right. Before we get to our listener mailbag, I know we're running a little long here today on this one, so let's get to just one of these where I am higher than the ECR. Josh Jacobs, boys, to me is not getting any respect. I have him as RB7 this week against Houston, who's just absolutely dreadful against the run. ECR has him at 13. Pat Fitzmaurice, tell me that I'm right and ECR is wrong.
No, I think you could be. I mentioned that big group of guys bunched together from running back 7 to running back 12. Yeah, and Jacobs is definitely in there, but man, you have to love that he's averaging almost 100 rushing yards a game and getting used in the passing game and in a game against the Texans, a good matchup, bad defense, 7-point home favorites. There's a lot to like about Jacobs for sure.
Stampfl, 32 points, 28 points, coming off a bye, got Houston. What's not to like about Jacobs this week, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I don't have him as high as 7. I have him at 9. But again, that's kind of like a glob that Pat has been talking about, where you can, all those names are pretty interchangeable. But 81% of the snaps, 26 or more touches in each of the past 2 games. The usage is outstanding. And it's an amazing, amazing matchup. 7-point home favorites, as Pat mentioned. I mean, what's not to like? That's exactly it. I think he's going to be a big cash game play for DFS this week as well.
Let's get to our listener mailbag straight from our Discord at fantasypros.com/chat. Again, free to join, but premium subscribers get access to AMA's Discord stages. And of course, the touchdown call contest where we're giving away merch money. We're giving away jerseys. So go check it out at fantasypros.com/chat. JMG24 has a question. Which of these two would you prefer rest of season? J Rob or B Rob? Between two Robs, which Rob do you prefer, Frank Stampfl?
So I'm going to give you guys the plug here. I did use the Fantasy Pro Strength of Schedule tool just to see like what's going on rest of season. And both of these running backs have 4-star schedules the rest of the way. I think I lean with Brian Robinson, but it is really, really close. It's just because he's ascending to the top of his depth chart, whereas it looks like James Robinson is kind of falling back as the RB2 for the Jaguars. But I think this is razor thin. Like if you trust the Jaguars offense more, I cannot blame you one bit. I think I lean with Brian Robinson.
Pat, which Robinson is you?
J-Rob. I mean, I agree with Frank about the workload. That is starting to tilt in Brian Robinson's favor, not in James Robinson's favor. But I mean, I hate the Washington quarterback situation. I hate their offensive line. I hate their team. It's just a tough situation for a running back to thrive in.
All right, there you have it. Make sure you follow our good friend Frank Stampfl on the Twitter machine at roto_Frank and check out all of his great work at CBS Fantasy. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Frank and Pat, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.